Hello, my little love. Did you have a good day today? I hope something made you smile. Now take a slow breath, relax your shoulders, and let your mind get soft and quiet. It's time for a gentle bedtime story. Now, my little love, let me gently tell you a calming story called The Fairy and the Woodcutter. Once upon a time, in a peaceful land where mountains rose like gentle giants and streams sang soft lullabies as they flowed, there lived a kind woodcutter. He had no family of his own, but he was never truly lonely because the forest was his friend. Every morning, he would wake with the sunrise, stretch slowly, and walk through the trees to gather wood for the village. The woodcutter was gentle with everything he touched. When he cut branches, he thanked the trees. When he walked along the forest paths, he stepped carefully so as not to disturb the small creatures who made their homes among the roots and leaves. The birds knew him well, and they would follow him sometimes, singing cheerful songs that echoed softly through the green canopy above. One warm afternoon, when the sun filtered through the leaves in golden streams and butterflies danced lazily from flower to flower, the woodcutter was walking near a hidden pond. This pond was special, so clear and still that it reflected the sky perfectly, like a mirror made of water. Willow trees grew around its edges, their long branches trailing in the water like gentle fingers. As the woodcutter approached, he heard the most beautiful sounds, laughter like tiny bells ringing, and splashing that was soft and musical. He moved quietly, not wanting to disturb whatever magic might be happening, and when he peeked through the willow branches, he saw something wonderful. There, in the pond, were fairies bathing in the cool, clear water. They wore robes made of silk so fine and delicate that they seemed to shimmer like moonlight. The robes lay on the grass at the pond's edge, folded neatly, while the fairies played in the water, their laughter filling the air with joy. The woodcutter watched for just a moment, mesmerized by their beauty and grace. But then he noticed something. One fairy seemed different from the others. She moved more gently, smiled more kindly, and her eyes held a depth of warmth that touched his heart. Just then, an old deer stepped quietly through the trees and stood beside the woodcutter. This was no ordinary deer. His eyes were wise and ancient, and when he spoke, his voice was like wind through pine branches. "Woodcutter," whispered the deer softly, "if you wish to find companionship and love, you might take one of those fairy robes. Without her robe, a fairy cannot return to the heavens. She would need to stay here with you." The woodcutter felt his heart flutter with hope, but also with uncertainty. "Would that be right?" he asked the deer quietly. "Would she not be sad to stay?" The deer nodded slowly. "She might be sad at first," he admitted. "But if you are kind and patient, if you treat her with gentleness and respect, she may grow to love this earthly life and choose to stay with you willingly. But remember this important thing: you must not return her robe to her until she has given you 3 children. Only then will her heart be so bound to this world that she will not wish to leave." The woodcutter thought about this carefully. He did long for companionship, for someone to share his simple but peaceful life. And so, moving as quietly as a falling leaf, he took one of the shimmering robes and hid it carefully in his cottage. When the fairies finished bathing and the sun began to lower in the sky, they came to the shore to retrieve their robes. One by one, they dressed and rose into the air, their forms becoming lighter and lighter until they disappeared into the clouds like mist in the morning. But one fairy could not find her robe. She searched and searched, her expression growing worried, then sad. She called out to her sisters, but they had already returned to the heavens and could not hear her. As darkness began to fall gently over the forest, she sat by the pond, unsure of what to do. The woodcutter approached carefully, his footsteps soft on the moss. "Please don't be afraid," he said in the gentlest voice he could manage. "You are welcome to stay in my cottage tonight, where it is warm and safe. Tomorrow we can search for your robe together." The fairy looked at him with eyes that held both sadness and hope. She could see that he was kind, that his offer came from a good heart. So she nodded and followed him to his small cottage at the edge of the forest. The cottage was simple but cozy. A fire burned warmly in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the wooden walls. The woodcutter prepared a simple meal: rice, vegetables from his garden, and tea made from herbs that grew by the stream. They ate together in comfortable silence, and gradually, the fairy's sadness began to ease just a little. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, like seasons changing slowly and naturally. The fairy stayed with the woodcutter, and though at first she would gaze at the sky with longing in her eyes, she began to notice the beauty of earthly life. She learned to tend the garden, to cook meals that filled the cottage with wonderful smells, to mend clothes and keep the house warm and welcoming. The woodcutter was always kind to her, never demanding, always patient. He would bring her wildflowers from the forest, tell her stories by the fire, and listen when she spoke of her home in the heavens. Slowly, gently, like a flower opening to the sun, the fairy's heart began to open to him. One spring morning, when cherry blossoms fell like pink snow and filled the air with their sweet scent, the fairy realized something wonderful. She had fallen in love with the woodcutter. Not because she was trapped, but because his kindness had shown her a different kind of magic, the magic of simple, honest love. They were married in a quiet ceremony under the cherry trees, with birds as their witnesses and the forest as their chapel. Time passed peacefully, and they were blessed with children, first one, then another, then a third. Each child was a joy, with bright eyes and gentle spirits, and the fairy loved them more than she had thought possible. The woodcutter, seeing how happy his wife was, how deeply she loved their children, decided it was time to keep his promise to the deer. He brought out the shimmering robe he had hidden so long ago and gave it to his wife. "This belongs to you," he said softly. "I should have returned it sooner. You are free to return to the heavens if you wish." The fairy took the robe and held it gently, feeling its familiar softness. She looked at the robe, then at her husband, then at their 3 children playing peacefully in the garden. Her heart was full of different feelings: love for the heavens she once called home, and love for this earthly life she had built. "I have missed my home," she admitted quietly. "I have missed my sisters and the clouds and the wide, open sky." The woodcutter felt his heart grow heavy, but he nodded with understanding. He had always known this moment might come. But the fairy continued, "However, my heart is here now. My children are here. You are here. This is my home now, not because I must stay, but because I choose to stay." Relief and joy flooded through the woodcutter, and they embraced gently while their children laughed and played nearby. The fairy kept her robe, but she folded it carefully and placed it in a special chest, a reminder of where she came from but not where she belonged anymore. They lived happily together for many years, raising their children in the peaceful cottage at the forest's edge. The fairy taught the children about the stars and the sky, and the woodcutter taught them about the forest and the earth. The children grew up understanding both worlds, feeling connected to heaven and earth in equal measure. And sometimes, on clear nights when the moon was full and bright, the fairy would stand outside and look up at the sky, and she would see her sisters dancing among the stars. They would wave to her, and she would wave back. And everyone was happy, the fairies in heaven, and the fairy on earth who had found love in the most unexpected way. The night grows softer now, and everything feels calm and safe. Now a new story begins, slowly and peacefully. Let me tell you about the country mouse and the city mouse. Once upon a time, in a quiet corner of a peaceful meadow where grass grew tall and wildflowers nodded in the gentle breeze, there lived a little mouse. This mouse had soft brown fur, bright black eyes, and a twitching pink nose that was always sniffing the sweet air. The country mouse lived in a cozy burrow beneath an old oak tree. Her home was simple but comfortable, lined with dried grass that smelled like summer, with little chambers for sleeping and storing food. She had everything she needed to be happy: seeds and grains she gathered from the fields, fresh water from a nearby stream, and the peaceful sounds of nature all around her. Every morning, the country mouse would wake with the sunrise and step outside to greet the day. She would stretch her tiny legs, feel the cool dew on her paws, and listen to the birds singing their morning songs. She would gather food slowly and carefully, enjoying the simple pleasure of finding a plump seed here, a tasty berry there. Her days were peaceful and predictable. She would eat her meals slowly, savoring each bite. She would take naps in the warm afternoon sun, curled up in a spot where the grass made a soft bed. She would visit with the other creatures of the meadow: the friendly rabbits, the wise old turtle, the cheerful sparrows who always had news to share. One day, a visitor arrived at her burrow, her cousin from the city. The city mouse was sleek and well-groomed, with shiny fur and a confident manner. She wore a tiny scarf around her neck that made her look very fashionable and sophisticated. "Cousin," called the country mouse with delight. "Welcome to my home. Please, come in and rest. You must be tired from your journey." The city mouse entered the burrow and looked around with curious eyes. She saw the simple furnishings, the modest supplies of food, the quiet, plain surroundings. But she smiled politely and said nothing critical. "Let me prepare a meal for you," said the country mouse happily. She brought out her best food: fresh wheat grains, some sweet clover, crisp apple pieces, and cool water from the stream. She arranged everything carefully on a flat stone that served as her table. They sat together and ate, and the country mouse was so happy to share her home with her cousin. "Isn't it lovely here?" she said, gesturing to the world outside her burrow where butterflies danced and bees hummed softly. "Everything is so peaceful and calm." The city mouse ate politely, but she didn't seem very impressed. "It is certainly peaceful," she said carefully. "But cousin, don't you find it a bit plain? A bit too quiet? There's so much more excitement in the city, so much more to see and taste and experience." The country mouse tilted her head, curious. Really? Tell me about the city. The city mouse's eyes lit up. Oh, cousin, the city is amazing. There are buildings tall as mountains, lights that shine like stars. Even at night, and food, such incredible food. Rich cheeses, sweet cakes, fruits from faraway lands. Nothing like these simple grains and apples. The country mouse felt a flutter of curiosity in her chest. It sounds wonderful, she admitted. I've never been beyond this meadow. Then you must come visit me, exclaimed the city mouse. Come see my home, taste the amazing food, experience the excitement of city life. You'll love it, I promise. The country mouse felt both nervous and excited. She had always been content in her meadow, but the thought of seeing something new, of having an adventure, appealed to her gentle, curious nature. All right, she said softly. I will come visit you. So the next morning, as the sun rose and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, the two mice set off together. They traveled through fields and forests, over hills and across streams, until gradually the landscape began to change. The wide open spaces gave way to roads and buildings. The soft sounds of nature were replaced by the rumble of carts and the chatter of many voices. Finally, they arrived at the city. The country mouse had never seen anything like it. Buildings rose high into the sky, blocking out the stars. Streets were crowded with people and animals rushing here and there. Everything was loud and bright and busy, so different from her quiet meadow. The city mouse led her cousin through narrow alleys and secret passages until they reached a grand house. This is where I live, she whispered. Well, not officially, of course. But I know all the best places to find food. She led the country mouse through a small crack in the wall and into a grand dining room. The country mouse gasped. There was a huge table laden with the most amazing foods she had ever seen: golden cheeses that smelled rich and tangy, cakes with sweet frosting, roasted meats, fresh fruits that looked like jewels, and puddings that wobbled and gleamed. Help yourself, said the city mouse, already nibbling on a piece of cheese. The country mouse approached the table carefully. She took a tiny bite of cheese, and her eyes widened. It was delicious, so much more flavorful than anything in her meadow. She tried a bit of cake, and it was sweet and soft and wonderful. She felt excitement bubbling up inside her. Maybe the city mouse was right. Maybe this was better than her simple life. But just as she was beginning to enjoy herself, she heard a sound that made her freeze: heavy footsteps approaching, and then a loud, sharp bark. A large dog had entered the room, and it had spotted the mice on the table. Run! Cried the city mouse, and both mice scrambled as fast as their little legs could carry them. They raced across the table, leapt to the floor, and dashed toward their hole in the wall. The dog chased them, barking loudly, its teeth snapping just behind them. They made it to safety just in time, squeezing through the crack in the wall as the dog's nose pressed against the opening, snuffling and growling. Both mice sat in the darkness, breathing hard, their hearts pounding like tiny drums. After a few moments, when the dog had been called away and everything grew quiet again, the city mouse sighed with relief. That was close, she said, almost cheerfully. But don't worry, that happens sometimes. You get used to it. Now, Shall we wait a bit and then go back for more of that delicious food? But the country mouse was shaking her head slowly. No, cousin, she said softly. I don't think I want to go back. The city mouse looked surprised. But the food is so good. And there's so much excitement. Yes, agreed the country mouse. The food is wonderful, and everything here is amazing and new. But I realize now that I don't need amazing food or excitement. What I need is peace and safety. I need to feel calm and comfortable, to sleep soundly at night without worry, to enjoy my simple meals without fear. She looked at her cousin with kind eyes. You love this life, and that's wonderful for you. But I love my meadow. I love waking up to bird songs and falling asleep to cricket chirps. I love gathering my own food and knowing exactly where it comes from. I love the peace and the predictability. The city mouse nodded slowly, beginning to understand. I see, she said. Different lives for different mice. Exactly, said the country mouse warmly. Neither is better or worse. They're just different, and I know now which one is right for me. The two cousins said a fond goodbye, promising to visit each other again but understanding each other better now. The country mouse made the long journey back to her meadow, and when she finally saw her oak tree in the distance, her heart swelled with happiness. She hurried to her burrow, went inside, and looked around at her simple, modest home. It wasn't fancy or exciting, but it was safe and peaceful and hers. She curled up in her bed of dried grass, listening to the familiar sounds of the meadow settling down for the night, and she felt completely, perfectly content. From that day on, whenever someone asked her if she ever wanted to live a more exciting life, she would smile and say, I already have the most wonderful life imaginable. It's peaceful, it's safe, and it's exactly what I need. And she lived happily in her meadow for many, many years, grateful for her simple pleasures and the wisdom to know that sometimes the quietest life is the most beautiful one of all. Everything feels calm and safe, and now another gentle story drifts quietly into place. Let me tell you about Belling the cat. In a cozy house where sunlight streamed through the windows and made warm patches on the wooden floor, there lived a family of mice. They were a cheerful group: mothers and fathers, grandmothers and grandfathers, aunts and uncles, and many little mouse children who loved to play and explore. The house was a good home for mice. There were plenty of places to hide, crumbs to eat, and warm spots to curl up and sleep. The mice had made their nests in the walls, behind the stove, and under the floorboards. And they lived together peacefully, taking care of one another and sharing everything they found. But there was one problem that made life difficult for the mice: a large cat who also lived in the house. Now, this cat wasn't mean or cruel by nature, but he was a cat, and cats naturally like to chase mice. It was simply his way. The cat was clever and very, very quiet. He could walk so softly that the mice couldn't hear him coming. His paws made no sound on the floor, and he could appear suddenly, without warning, in places where the mice thought they were safe. This made the mice feel worried and anxious. They couldn't relax and enjoy their lives because they never knew when the cat might appear. They couldn't play freely or gather food peacefully because they always had to be watching, always had to be ready to run and hide. The mouse families began to feel quite stressed. The little mouse children couldn't play their games without stopping every few moments to look around nervously. The older mice were tired from constantly being on alert. Something needed to change. One evening, when the house was quiet and the moon shone gently through the windows, all the mice gathered together for a meeting. They came from all corners of the house, climbing down from the rafters, squeezing out from behind the walls, emerging from under the furniture. They formed a circle in a hidden corner where they felt safe, and everyone settled down to talk about their problem. An old grandfather mouse, with gray whiskers and wise eyes, spoke first. "Friends," he said in a gentle, thoughtful voice, "we have gathered here tonight to find a solution to our difficulty. The cat makes it hard for us to live peacefully. We need to think of a way to make our lives safer and more comfortable." All the mice nodded in agreement. Then, one by one, different mice stood up to share their ideas. A young mouse suggested, "Perhaps we could dig deeper tunnels and never come out at all." But the others shook their heads gently. "We would miss the sunlight and the fresh crumbs," they said. "We can't live our whole lives in darkness." An ant mouse offered, "Maybe we could move to a different house." But again, the others weren't sure. "We know this house. We've built our homes here. It would be sad to leave everything behind." More ideas were shared, each one considered carefully and respectfully. The mice were kind to one another, never laughing at anyone's suggestions, always listening with open minds and gentle hearts. Then a clever young mouse, one who loved to think and solve problems, stood up. Her eyes were bright with an idea. "I think I know what we could do," she said softly. "What if we put a bell on the cat's collar?" The other mice looked at her with curiosity. "A bell?" they asked. "Yes," said the young mouse, growing more confident. "Think about it. The reason the cat is so dangerous is because we can't hear him coming. But if he wore a bell around his neck, it would ring softly every time he moved. We would hear the gentle tinkling sound and know he was nearby. We could hide before he got too close. We would be safe." A murmur of excitement spread through the group. The mice began to talk among themselves, nodding and smiling. "That's brilliant," they said. "A bell would solve everything. We'd hear him coming and have time to hide. We could live without fear." The young mouse felt proud and happy. She had solved their problem. All the mice began to celebrate, imagining how wonderful life would be with a bell on the cat's collar. They could play freely, gather food without worry, and sleep soundly without fear. But then, in the midst of the celebration, the old grandfather mouse held up his paw for silence. The happy chatter died down, and everyone looked at him. His expression was kind but serious. "My dear friends," he said gently, "that is indeed a wonderful idea. A bell would solve our problem completely. But there is one important question we must answer." He paused and looked around at all the eager faces. "Who among us will actually put the bell on the cat?" The room fell completely silent. All the mice looked at one another. The excited smiles faded, and thoughtful expressions took their place. They began to understand what the old mouse was saying. "Think about it carefully," continued the grandfather mouse in his kind, patient voice. "To put a bell on the cat, one of us would have to get very close to him. We would have to approach him while he's sleeping or distracted. We would have to be brave enough to touch his collar and attach the bell without waking him or alerting him. Who feels ready to do this? The mice looked down at their paws. They shuffled nervously. Each one was imagining actually approaching the cat, actually getting close enough to fasten a bell to his collar. It suddenly seemed like a very difficult and scary thing to do. The young mouse who had suggested the idea spoke up quietly. I thought it was a good idea," she said. "But now that I think about actually doing it, I'm not sure I'm brave enough." One by one, the other mice admitted the same thing. The mother mice said they couldn't risk it because they had children to care for. The father mice said they needed to stay safe to provide for their families. The young mice were too inexperienced, and the old mice were too slow. Everyone had a reason why they couldn't be the one to bell the cat. The old grandfather mouse nodded with understanding. "You see," he said gently, "it's easy to have ideas. It's easy to imagine solutions. But it's much harder to actually do the difficult things that our ideas require. A plan is only good if someone is willing and able to carry it out." The mice sat in thoughtful silence, understanding the wisdom of these words. They weren't being scolded or criticized. The old mouse's tone was kind and educational. He was simply helping them see an important truth about the difference between ideas and actions. "So what should we do?" asked a small mouse child softly. The grandfather mouse smiled gently. "We do what we've always done," he said. "We stay careful. We watch out for one another. We warn each other when we hear or see the cat. We use our intelligence and our community to stay safe. It's not as perfect as a bell would be, but it's realistic. It's something we can actually do." The mice nodded slowly, accepting this wisdom. They realized that sometimes the best solution isn't the most clever one, but the one that can actually be accomplished. They learned that it's important to think not just about what would be ideal, but about what's truly possible. From that night on, the mice continued to live in the house, still watching out for the cat, but with a new understanding. When young mice came up with exciting ideas, the older mice would gently ask, "But how would we actually do that? Who would be willing to take that risk?" The mice also became better at working together. They developed a system of soft squeaks and signals to warn each other when the cat was near. They created safe paths through the house that were easier to defend. They built their community stronger through cooperation rather than through one big, impossible solution. And they all remembered the lesson from that meeting that wisdom means thinking not just about what we wish could happen, but about what we can actually accomplish with the resources and courage we have. The cat continued to live in the house too, and he never did get a bell on his collar. But the mice learned to live with caution and community, and though life wasn't perfect, it was good enough. They had each other, they had their wisdom, and they had learned an important lesson about the difference between clever ideas and practical actions. And so all the creatures in the house lived on, each doing what they naturally did, but with a little more understanding about the world and how to navigate it wisely and safely. The night grows softer now, and everything feels warm and peaceful. Now another gentle story begins to unfold. Let me tell you about the princess and the pea. Once upon a time, in a kingdom where flowers bloomed in every season and birds sang from dawn to dusk, there lived a young prince. He had kind eyes, a gentle smile, and a heart full of hope. He lived in a beautiful castle with his loving parents, the king and queen, and he had everything he could want except for one thing. He longed to find someone special to share his life with, someone who understood him completely. The prince wanted to marry a princess, but not just any princess. He wanted to find someone who was truly genuine. Someone whose kindness came from deep within. Someone who was sensitive and real in a world that sometimes felt full of pretending. So the prince traveled far and wide, visiting kingdoms near and distant. He met many princesses, and each one was lovely in her own way. But something always seemed not quite right. Some were polite but not warm. Others were beautiful but not sincere. Some laughed at all the right times but seemed to be acting rather than truly feeling. The prince returned home feeling discouraged but not defeated. His mother, the queen, put her arm around his shoulders and said gently, "Don't worry, my dear. The right person will come along when the time is right. Sometimes we find what we're looking for when we stop searching so hard." The prince nodded and tried to believe her words. He settled back into his life at the castle, spending his days reading in the library, walking in the gardens, and helping his father manage the kingdom's affairs. He tried not to think too much about finding a princess, but in his quiet moments, he still hoped. One evening, a terrible storm began to build on the horizon. Dark clouds rolled in like tumbling shadows, and the wind picked up, making the tree branches sway and dance. Rain began to fall first in gentle drops, then in sheets that drummed against the castle windows. Thunder rumbled in the distance like a giant clearing his throat, and lightning flickered across the sky in bright, brief flashes. Inside the castle, everyone was cozy and warm. Fires burned in the hearths, candles flickered peacefully, and the royal family sat together in the drawing room, reading and talking quietly while the storm raged outside. Then, through the sound of rain and wind, they heard something, a gentle knocking at the great castle door. Knock, 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 polite and patient despite the terrible weather. The king looked up from his book. Who could that be, out in this storm? He wondered aloud. A servant went to the door and opened it carefully. There, standing in the doorway, drenched from head to toe, was a young woman. Water dripped from her hair and clothes, forming little puddles on the stone floor. She was shivering slightly from the cold, but she smiled politely and spoke in a soft, kind voice. "Please forgive me for disturbing you," she said. "I was traveling when the storm caught me. I saw your castle lights and hoped I might find shelter for the night." Of course," said the king warmly, for he and the queen were kind and hospitable people. "Please, come in out of the rain." The young woman stepped inside, and despite being soaked and bedraggled, there was something gentle and genuine about her manner. The prince, who had come to see who was at the door, felt his heart beat a little faster. There was something different about this visitor. The young woman explained that she was a princess from a faraway kingdom, traveling to visit a relative when the storm had appeared suddenly. She had lost her way in the rain and was grateful to find the castle. The queen called for warm towels and dry clothes, and servants bustled about kindly, making sure their unexpected guest was comfortable. The princess was taken to a room where she could dry off and change into warm, comfortable clothes borrowed from the castle's wardrobe. When she returned to the drawing room, looking much more comfortable, the royal family invited her to sit by the fire and have some warm tea and soup. They talked together pleasantly, and the prince found himself genuinely interested in everything she said. She spoke with such sincerity, such natural warmth, that he felt himself hoping could she be the one he had been searching for? But the queen, being wise and wanting to be sure, decided to conduct a gentle test. She wanted to know if this young woman was truly as sensitive and genuine as she seemed, a real princess with a tender, perceptive nature. "We must prepare a room for our guest," the queen said to the servants. Then she added quietly, where only they could hear, "Please follow my special instructions exactly." The servants prepared the grandest guest room in the castle. They took 20 soft mattresses, each one thick and cushiony and comfortable, and stacked them one on top of another, creating a bed so tall that a small ladder would be needed to climb into it. But before placing the very first mattress on the bed frame, the queen placed a single, tiny pea. It was such a small thing, this pea round and green and no bigger than a child's fingertip. It seemed impossible that anyone could feel it through 20 thick mattresses. But the queen believed that a true princess would have such a sensitive, genuine nature that she would notice even the smallest discomfort. The bed was made beautiful with soft sheets and warm blankets, and pillows were fluffed and arranged invitingly. Everything looked perfectly comfortable and welcoming. When bedtime came, the princess was shown to her room. She thanked everyone graciously and climbed up the little ladder to the top of the tall bed. The servants bid her good night and closed the door softly, leaving her to rest after her long, wet journey. The castle grew quiet as everyone settled down for the night. The storm outside began to calm, the rain softening to a gentle patter, the wind dying down to a peaceful breeze. Stars began to appear between the slowly parting clouds. Morning came with soft sunlight streaming through the windows. Birds began their morning songs, and the smell of fresh bread and tea drifted up from the kitchens. The royal family gathered for breakfast, and soon the princess joined them, climbing down the tall staircase with a gentle smile. "Good morning, my dear," said the queen kindly. "Did you sleep well?" The princess hesitated, not wanting to seem ungrateful for the wonderful hospitality. "Everyone has been so kind," she said carefully, "and the room was beautiful." But she paused, looking a bit embarrassed. "Yes?" encouraged the queen gently. "I'm sorry to say I didn't sleep very well at all," admitted the princess. "I hope this doesn't sound strange, but I felt something uncomfortable beneath me all night. It was very small, but it kept me from resting properly. I'm covered in small bruises from tossing and turning, trying to get comfortable. I do apologize, I'm sure it's just my imagination." The queen's face broke into the warmest, most delighted smile. The king began to chuckle softly, and the prince looked at the princess with eyes full of joy and hope. "My dear," said the queen, taking the princess's hands in hers, "you have nothing to apologize for. In fact, you have just proven something wonderful. Only someone with a truly sensitive, genuine nature could have felt a single pea through 20 mattresses. You are indeed a real princess, not because of your title or your kingdom, but because of your true, sensitive nature." The princess looked surprised and then pleased. The prince stepped forward, his face glowing with happiness. "Would you?" he began, then started again. "Would you consider staying longer? I would love to know you better. I feel that I've been searching for someone exactly like you." The princess smiled warmly, her eyes meeting his with understanding and affection. "I would like that very much," she said softly. And so the princess stayed at the castle, and as days turned into weeks, she and the prince spent time together walking in the gardens, talking by the fire, sharing meals and stories and quiet moments. They discovered that they understood each other perfectly, that their hearts spoke the same language, that they had found in each other the genuine connection they had both been hoping for. Eventually, the prince asked the princess to marry him, and she said yes with tears of joy in her eyes. They were married in a beautiful ceremony in the castle gardens, surrounded by flowers and friends and family who were so happy to see two people so perfectly suited find each other. The tiny pea that had revealed the princess's true nature was placed in a special glass case in the castle museum, where visitors could see it and hear the story of how such a small thing had led to such a great happiness. And the prince and princess lived together in joy and understanding, always appreciating each other's sensitive, genuine natures, always treating each other with tenderness and respect, and always grateful for the stormy night that had brought them together. Everything feels calm and safe, and now another gentle story drifts quietly into our peaceful night. Let me tell you about the shepherd boy and the wolf. In a peaceful village surrounded by rolling green hills and meadows full of wildflowers, there lived a young shepherd boy. His job was to take care of the village's flock of sheep, and it was a responsibility he took seriously, at least at first. Every morning, as the sun rose and painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, the boy would lead the sheep out of the village and up into the hills. The sheep were gentle creatures with soft, fluffy wool and sweet, trusting faces. They would follow the boy wherever he led them, believing he would keep them safe. The boy would find a good spot on the hillside where the grass was green and fresh, and he would settle down to watch the sheep graze. It was peaceful work. The sheep would munch contentedly on the grass, occasionally bleating softly to one another. Butterflies would float by on the warm breeze. Birds would sing their cheerful songs. The whole world seemed calm and safe and beautiful. But after a few weeks of this quiet routine, the boy began to feel bored. Every day was the same, sitting on the hillside, watching sheep eat grass, with nothing exciting happening at all. He longed for some adventure, some excitement, something different to break up the peaceful but repetitive days. One afternoon, as he sat under a shady tree watching the sheep graze lazily in the warm sunshine, an idea came to him. What if he pretended there was danger? What if he called for help? And the villagers came running, and for a little while, things would be exciting and interesting. The boy knew it wasn't a kind thing to do, but his loneliness and boredom made the idea seem tempting. Before he had really thought it through, he jumped to his feet and began shouting at the top of his lungs. "Wolf! Wolf!" he cried, making his voice sound frightened and urgent. "A wolf is attacking the sheep. Help! Please help!" Down in the village, people heard his cries. Farmers dropped their tools. Mothers stopped their cooking. Fathers left their work. Everyone came running up the hill as fast as they could, their faces worried and determined. They carried sticks and rakes and whatever they could find to help chase away the wolf and protect the sheep. When they reached the hillside, breathing hard from their run, they looked around urgently. "Where is the wolf?" they called. "Are you hurt?" Are the sheep safe? The boy, watching them all gathered around him with their concerned faces, couldn't help but laugh. "There's no wolf," he said, giggling at how easily they had believed him. "I was just joking. Look, the sheep are all fine." The villagers looked at one another with confused and disappointed expressions. They had dropped everything to help him, had run all the way up the hill, had been truly worried for his safety and the safety of the sheep. And it had all been a joke. "That wasn't very kind," said one of the older farmers gently but firmly. "We were truly worried about you. It's important to tell the truth," added a grandmother, shaking her head. "False alarms waste everyone's time and cause unnecessary worry." But the boy just shrugged, still pleased with himself for creating some excitement in his boring day. The villagers walked slowly back down the hill, feeling disappointed and a bit frustrated. Several days passed, and the boy returned to his routine of watching the sheep. The peaceful days seemed even more boring now, and he remembered how exciting it had been to see everyone come running, how much attention he had received, even if it had been based on a lie. So one afternoon, feeling particularly bored and mischievous, he did it again. "Wolf! Wolf!" he shouted, even louder this time. "A wolf is really here now. Please help. The sheep are in danger." Once again, the villagers heard his cries. This time they hesitated for just a moment, remembering the false alarm before. But the boy sounded so desperate, so truly frightened, that they couldn't ignore him. What if this time it was real? They couldn't risk leaving him alone if he was truly in danger. So once again, they dropped everything and hurried up the hill. Once again, they arrived out of breath, carrying improvised weapons, ready to help. And once again, they found the boy laughing, the sheep grazing peacefully, and no wolf anywhere in sight. "Fooled you again," the boy said, finding his own trick even funnier the second time. But this time, the villagers were not just disappointed, they were hurt and upset. "This is not a game," said a father sternly. "When you cry wolf and there is no wolf, you make it so that no one will believe you when there is real danger. You're putting yourself and the sheep at risk. You need to understand the importance of trust," said a mother gently but seriously. "Trust is like a precious vase. Once it's broken, it's very hard to put back together." But the boy didn't really listen. He thought they were overreacting. It had just been a joke, twice. What was the big deal? The villagers walked back down the hill, shaking their heads, and this time they talked among themselves. "If he cries wolf again," they said, "we won't come running. He's used up our trust." More days passed. The boy continued to watch the sheep, and now he noticed that the villagers seemed less friendly when he returned to the village in the evenings. They would nod politely but didn't stop to chat with him like they used to. He began to feel a bit lonely, but he told himself he didn't care. Then one afternoon, as the sun was starting to lower in the sky and the shadows were growing longer, the boy heard a sound that made his blood run cold. It was a rustling in the bushes, and then a low growl, deep and threatening and real. A wolf stepped out from behind the trees. This was a real wolf, with sharp teeth and hungry eyes and a predatory way of moving. The wolf had spotted the flock of sheep, and his intention was clear. He began to move toward them slowly, calculating which one would be easiest to catch. The boy's heart began to pound with real fear. This was nothing like the pretend danger he had called about before. This was actual danger, serious and immediate. The sheep sensed it too and began to huddle together, bleating nervously. "Wolf! Wolf!" the boy cried out, and this time his voice was genuinely filled with fear and desperation. "Please help. There's really a wolf this time. I'm not joking. Please believe me. The sheep are in real danger." But down in the village, the people heard his cries and looked at one another with tired expressions. "There he goes again," they said, shaking their heads. "He thinks he's funny, but he's just being foolish." "I'm not falling for it a third time," said a farmer. "Neither am I," agreed a mother. "He's cried wolf too many times before when there was no wolf. Why should we believe him now?" And so, despite the boy's desperate, genuine cries for help, no one came running. No one rushed up the hill with sticks and rakes. No one came to help chase away the wolf. The boy watched in horror as the wolf moved closer to the flock. He tried to frighten it away by shouting and throwing stones, but the wolf was not intimidated by a lone boy. Fortunately, because the boy did make enough noise and commotion, the wolf decided it wasn't worth the effort and eventually slunk away into the forest, looking for easier prey elsewhere. The sheep were safe, but only barely, and only because the wolf had decided not to press the attack. The boy sat down on the hillside, his heart still racing, and he felt tears of shame and fear rolling down his cheeks. He had been so lucky. The sheep could have been hurt. He could have been hurt. And it would have been his own fault, because he had destroyed the villagers' trust with his previous lies. When evening came and the boy led the sheep back to the village, his head was hanging low. He went to the village square where people were gathering for the evening meal, and he stood before them with genuine remorse in his eyes. "I need to apologize," he said quietly, his voice trembling. "Today there really was a wolf, and you didn't come because you didn't believe me. And I understand why. I lied to you twice before, and I broke your trust. I'm so sorry. You were right, lying about danger is not a joke. It's serious, and I've learned that lesson the hard way." The villagers looked at him, and though they were still disappointed, they could see that he truly understood now. His apology was genuine, and he had clearly learned something important. The old farmer who had spoken to him before came forward and put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "We appreciate your apology," he said kindly but seriously. "Trust takes a long time to build but can be destroyed in an instant. You've learned an important lesson about the consequences of lying. From now on, we need you to promise that you will always tell the truth, especially about matters of safety." "I promise," said the boy, and he meant it with all his heart. "I will never lie about danger again. I will always tell the truth." And from that day forward, the boy kept his promise. He never cried wolf when there was no wolf. He took his responsibility seriously, understanding that the safety of the sheep and the trust of the village depended on his honesty and reliability. Gradually, over time, the villagers began to trust him again. Trust, once broken, took time to rebuild, but with consistent honesty and reliable behavior, it did slowly return. The boy never forgot the lesson he had learned, that honesty is not just about being good, it's about keeping everyone safe and maintaining the bonds of trust that hold a community together. And the boy grew into a young man who was known throughout the region as the most honest and trustworthy shepherd anyone had ever known. All because he had learned, through a frightening experience, just how precious and important truth really is. The night grows deeper and more peaceful still. Let me share with you one more gentle story as we drift toward dreams. This story is called The Nutcracker. Once upon a time, in a cozy house where a loving family lived, there was great excitement in the air. It was Christmas Eve, and everything smelled wonderful pine boughs and cinnamon, warm cookies and sweet candles. The house was decorated beautifully with garlands and ribbons, and a magnificent Christmas tree stood in the parlor. Its branches covered with ornaments that sparkled in the candlelight. In this house lived a young girl named Clara. She had kind eyes and a gentle heart, and she loved Christmas more than any other time of year. She loved the way the house felt magical, the way everyone was happy and warm, the way everything seemed touched with wonder. That evening, Clara's family was hosting a Christmas party. Guests arrived in their finest clothes, bringing gifts and laughter. The parlor filled with music and conversation, and children ran about playing games while adults talked and sipped warm drinks. Among the guests was Clara's godfather, a kind old man who was known for making the most wonderful toys and mechanical devices. He had twinkling eyes and a warm smile, and he always brought special gifts for Clara and her brother. This year, the godfather brought several magnificent mechanical toys: a tiny castle with soldiers that marched, a bird that fluttered its wings, and other marvels that made everyone gasp with delight. But for Clara, he had something special: a wooden nutcracker shaped like a soldier, with a bright uniform painted on, a tall hat, and a kind face. The nutcracker was about as tall as Clara's forearm, and he stood at attention like a brave little soldier. Clara took him gently in her hands and looked at his painted face, and she felt an immediate affection for him. There was something about his steady expression and his loyal stance that made her feel he was special, different from all her other toys. "Thank you, Godfather," Clara whispered, holding the nutcracker close. "I love him." Her brother wanted to play with the nutcracker too, and in his enthusiasm, he was a bit rough with it. There was a sudden crack, and the nutcracker's jaw broke, hanging loose and making him look sad and injured. Clara felt tears spring to her eyes. Her beautiful nutcracker, given to her just moments ago, was already broken. But her godfather gently took the nutcracker from her hands and said soothingly, "Don't worry, my dear. I can fix him. With a little care and the right touch, he'll be as good as new." He took out a handkerchief and carefully bandaged the nutcracker's jaw, and Clara carried her wounded soldier carefully upstairs to her bedroom, where she tucked him into a small doll bed and whispered softly, "Rest now. You'll feel better soon." The party continued downstairs, but Clara stayed with her nutcracker, keeping him company. Eventually, as the evening grew late and the guests began to leave, Clara's mother called her to bed. Clara kissed her nutcracker goodnight and climbed into her own bed, pulling the covers up and closing her eyes. But Clara couldn't quite fall asleep. She lay in her bed, listening to the house grow quiet, watching the moonlight stream through her window and make silver patterns on the floor. She kept thinking about her nutcracker, wondering if he was comfortable in his little doll bed, hoping his jaw would heal. The grandfather clock in the hall began to chime midnight, its deep bells echoing through the quiet house. Dong, 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 12 times, marking the magical hour when Christmas Eve becomes Christmas Day. And as the final bell faded into silence, something wonderful began to happen. The moonlight streaming through Clara's window seemed to grow brighter, more luminous, and it began to sparkle with tiny points of light, like snow made of stars. Clara sat up in bed and saw that her room was changing. The furniture was growing larger, or perhaps she was growing smaller, it was hard to tell. The Christmas tree in the parlor below was stretching up and up, becoming enormous and magnificent. And her nutcracker, her dear nutcracker, was moving. The bandage fell away from his jaw, and he sat up in the little doll bed, no longer wooden and stiff, but moving fluidly and gracefully. He stood up, and as he did, he transformed into a handsome young prince, wearing a beautiful uniform that glittered in the magical moonlight. The Nutcracker Prince looked at Clara with eyes full of gratitude and warmth. "Dear Clara," he said in a voice that was gentle and kind, "thank you for your kindness and care. You saw value in me even when I was just a wooden toy, and you tended to me when I was broken. Now I want to show you something wonderful." He held out his hand, and Clara took it without hesitation, for she felt completely safe with him. Together they walked down the stairs, which had become grand and magical, covered in soft, glowing light. In the parlor, the Christmas tree had become even more magnificent, and beneath it was something amazing, an army of toy soldiers, all standing at attention and coming to life just as the Nutcracker had. But these were Clara's toys, her friends, and they smiled and waved to her as she passed. Suddenly, from the shadows beneath the furniture, came a group of mice, but these were no ordinary mice. They wore tiny crowns and carried tiny swords, led by a mouse king who had 7 heads, each wearing a small crown. But this wasn't a frightening moment, even though it might have been in other versions of the story. Instead, it was more like a game, a magical adventure. The Nutcracker Prince stepped forward to face the Mouse King and his toy soldier. Friends lined up beside him, and there was a gentle mock battle, more like a carefully choreographed dance than a real fight. Clara, wanting to help her friend, gently tossed a soft slipper at the Mouse King, startling him. The Mouse King stumbled backward, and his mouse army, seeing their leader defeated, scurried away into the shadows, squeaking their retreat. The battle was won without anyone getting hurt, and all the toy soldiers cheered. The Nutcracker Prince turned to Clara, his eyes shining with joy and gratitude. "You've helped me again," he said warmly. "Now, let me take you somewhere truly special." He led Clara to the Christmas tree, and as they approached it, the branches seemed to open like a doorway, revealing a path made of soft, glowing light. They stepped through together, and Clara found herself in the most beautiful place she had ever seen. This was the land of sweets, a kingdom made entirely of wonderful things. The ground sparkled with sugar crystals that crunched pleasantly underfoot. Trees grew peppermint sticks and candy canes, their branches heavy with chocolate truffles and marzipan fruits. Flowers made of spun sugar bloomed in every color imaginable, and the air smelled like vanilla and cinnamon and warm caramel. A beautiful sugar plum fairy came to greet them, her dress flowing like water and sparkling with crystallized sugar. "Welcome, dear Clara," she said in a voice like wind chimes. "The Nutcracker Prince has told us all about your kindness. We would like to celebrate you with a special performance." Clara and the Nutcracker Prince sat on soft thrones made of cotton, candy and marshmallow, and they watched as the most wonderful entertainment unfolded before them. Dancers from different lands performed gentle, beautiful dances, each one representing a different sweet treat from around the world. There was a Spanish dance, lively but not too fast, representing chocolate that melts smoothly on the tongue. There was a Chinese dance with delicate movements, representing tea that steams gently in a cup. There was an Arabian dance, flowing and graceful, representing coffee that warms you from the inside. And there was a Russian dance, energetic but joyful, representing candy canes with their peppermint swirl. But the most beautiful of all was the dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy herself, who moved with such grace and elegance that she seemed to float rather than dance, her movements like music made visible, like beauty itself taking form. Clara watched with wide eyes, her heart full of wonder and happiness. Everything was so peaceful and lovely, so magical and kind. The Nutcracker Prince sat beside her, and she was so grateful to him for bringing her to this wonderful place. When the dancing was finished and the celebration complete, the Sugar Plum Fairy came to Clara and said gently, "You have brought kindness and love into our kingdom. These are the most precious gifts of all. We hope you will remember us and know that magic lives wherever there is kindness." Clara felt sleepiness beginning to wash over her, soft and warm like a cozy blanket. The Nutcracker Prince took her hand and led her back through the path of light, back through the Christmas tree portal, back into her own parlor, which was slowly returning to its normal size and appearance. "Thank you for believing in me," the Nutcracker Prince whispered as the magical light began to fade. "Thank you for your kindness when I was just a broken toy." Clara wanted to answer, wanted to tell him that she would never forget this magical night. But her eyes were growing so heavy, and everything was becoming soft and dreamlike. She felt herself being lifted gently, and then she was in her own bed, with warm covers pulled up to her chin, and moonlight streaming peacefully through her window. When Clara woke on Christmas morning, the sun was shining brightly, and she could hear her family downstairs preparing breakfast. She sat up quickly, remembering the incredible adventure, the magical journey, the land of sweets, and the Nutcracker Prince. She looked over at the doll bed where she had placed her Nutcracker the night before. And there he was, just a wooden toy again, with his bandaged jaw, standing loyally at attention. But Clara noticed something different. His expression seemed kinder somehow, and she could have sworn he was smiling. Clara picked up the Nutcracker gently and held him close. "Thank you for the most wonderful adventure," she whispered to him. And though he didn't move or speak, she felt certain he had heard her and was happy. From that day forward, Clara treasured her Nutcracker above all her other toys. She kept him on a special shelf in her room where she could see him every day. And every Christmas, when the house filled with the smell of cookies and pine, when the tree sparkled with ornaments and the air felt magical, Clara would remember her midnight adventure and know that kindness and belief can create the most wonderful magic of all. As Clara grew older, She never forgot the lessons of that magical night, that seeing value in others, even when they seem broken or small, is one of the greatest gifts we can give. She never forgot the beauty of the land of sweets or the grace of the sugar plum fairies' dance. But most of all, she never forgot the feeling of wonder and joy that comes from believing in magic and treating everyone with kindness and care. And on quiet Christmas nights, when the moon was bright and the world was peaceful, if Clara looked carefully at her nutcracker on his special shelf, she could almost see him wink at her, as if to say, "I remember too, and I'm grateful you believed in me." The nutcracker stood guard over Clara's room for many, many years. A faithful friend and a reminder that the most important things in life, kindness, belief, and love, create their own magic, more powerful and lasting than any spell or enchantment could ever be. You did well today, my little love. Now let your eyes grow heavy, and let the night wrap around you like a soft blanket. Sleep well, sweet dreams, and rest deeply.